So Proverbs chapter 5, we're going to be looking at verses 15 through 23, and it is the conclusion of the section that began last week in the dangers of the immoral woman, the dangers of the adulteress there, and really this falling into immorality, Proverbs describes as the height of folly. It is the epitome of what it means to be a fool, is to fall into or to run after immorality. We are embracing folly, and so much so I would say there's much of our culture that is certainly not simple in the way the Proverbs uses the term, not even a fool in the milder use of the term, but there much of our culture is truly a scoffer. It is unrepentant, blatant, flagrant, and arrogant in its pursuit of immorality. And as we think on that, we come now to the right response to sex. And as Christians, we need to understand that. And so as we're thinking through this and thinking through what Proverbs teaches, verses 15 through 20 particularly are a biblical theology of sex. And it's something we should understand. We really should. For whether single or married, every one of us are confronted with, at the very least, with individuals who believe the world's view, who have bought into the worldly theology. And we need to understand the biblical theology so that we can instruct or counteract. So at the very least, we will not be deceived by the by the worldly theology, and that we will be able to help undeceive others. So let me read verses 15 through 23. He says, "Drink water from your own cistern, and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice with the wife of your youth, as a loving deer and a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entrap the wicked man. He is caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray." One author, he said, this debased view of sex as a thing in itself to be indulged in, played around with, and enjoyed quite separately from a faithful relationship of love and responsibility is being insidiously promoted today as never before, and we cannot be too much on our guard against it. He is almost completely accurate. The only word I would argue with is the word insidiously. That implies subtlety and a little bit of hiddenness to it. And it's not insidious anymore. It is flagrant. It parades itself in the streets. It claims that it has something to be proud of and says, this is what it is. You better accept it. And that is the view of sex, as it is something in and of itself that is a thing to be desired or sought after because it simply is. That is not the biblical view of sex. Proverbs 15 gives to us this image of marital delight. And Proverbs is clear, absolutely clear, that the only proper expression of a sexual relationship is within the marriage relationship. There's no other permissible expression of any sort. And what he does is he draws this picture and he says, drink from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Does anybody know what a cistern is? A cistern is a big catch basin. A well has its own source of water. It's essentially a spring and be filling it up. A cistern is catching water and storing it. So they're both necessary. Again, Israel is an arid climate. They don't get a lot of rain during the summer months. And so if there's not a spring or river handy, then they're collecting their water throughout the rainy time, so they'll have it when it's not raining. And so he's saying, you have your own cistern, you have your own collection of water, you have your own well, go there. It's find refreshing and satisfaction at home. He asks the question of, should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the street? You think about it, even today. I mean, if your water is just running, you could turn the kitchen sink on and just let it run. It's flowing out the door and down the street. That's not a good thing, obviously. Even though we live surrounded by lakes and more water than we could ever possibly use, it's still a bad thing. Here in Israel, we're dealing with a culture, again, where water is to be preserved. It is a precious thing because they have so much of the year where they're doing without. And so to let it spill wastefully out in the road and just run down the street it's not just silly. It's not just wasting money because your electrical pump is running all the time and your water is flowing out in the street. It's not because you're just wasteful because you're rotting your floorboards out. It is foolish. It's the height of folly because that which is in the imagery of water, that which is needed for your life is just being wasted. Now, I don't think we can go quite so far to say that sex is needed to live, even though our culture thinks that at times. But the idea of this height of folly, this absolutely ridiculous, absurd thing, is to do anything but to quench your sexual thirst at home. Anything other than that is folly in the extreme. And he also says physical intimacy is private. And physical intimacy is exclusive. Now, we have, within Christianity, there was a period of time, I think it's 10, 15 years ago now, where we decided to get on the cultural bandwagon. I say we, not including me. But many preachers decided to get on the cultural bandwagon and began to promote what they called a Christian view of sex. And much of it was Christian, but the way they did it was they made a spectacle out of it. I know I've used this, talked about this before, but it really is a perfect illustration of how ridiculous this was. One large church put a bed on the roof of their church building. The pastor and his wife went up on that bed and stayed there for a period of days. And they were promoting his series on a biblical view of sexuality by putting the pastor and his wife in a bed up on the roof. I mean, obviously, it's making a public spectacle of it. And there were shocking things, billboards that churches did. Some of them, some of the preachers, they got, well, some of them didn't just engage in locker room humor in the course of their teachings on sexuality and sex and marriage. And what they did is they came at trying to teach the biblical perspective, but they did it coming from a worldly perspective. They said, the world parades this, so let's parade it too. And that's not what Proverbs says. That's not what Scripture says. It says that this physical intimacy is private. It is to be kept at home. So he says, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. Especially that first phrase, the emphasis is the privacy. It's between you and your spouse, and that's it. It is not for public consumption. And I will say, that's not because there's a Victorian idea of this is a shameful thing. And we're going to see this as we keep going through. And if you've read Song of Solomon, the Bible actually doesn't present physical intimacy as shameful, but it does present it as private. So it's not something that we don't talk about because we're embarrassed about it. It's something that we don't talk about because it's none of your business. It's just that simple. It's nobody's business except for the husband and the wife. And anything beyond that goes beyond the bounds of what Scripture describes. And then it's exclusive. Nobody else is a party. Nobody else has any business being a part of this. It is between the husband and wife. And so it says, let it be your own and not for strangers with you. They don't. It is Bruce Waltke says it's a radical isolation from others. That's it. This kind of physical intimacy is reserved for one relationship and one relationship only. Nobody else, and that relationship is defined in Scriptures for us. One woman, one man, in a permanently covenanted relationship. And outside of that, there's no expression of physical intimacy. Outside of that, there's nobody else, that is to be brought into that. It's one man and one woman. That's it. That's the biblical view of this, is that there's nobody else involved. And so it is improper. Just as it's foolish to pour your water out in the street, to let your well just flow across the road, so it is proper for one spouse to give their sexual energies outside of their home. It's a very vivid picture. I mean, again, I think we see some of the vividness here in our culture, but if you can put your mind in the culture of people who go without fresh water for such a long period of time every year, this is vivid. It's just a waste water like that? It's unheard of. And that's what he's saying. This is, it's you and your spouse and nobody else. Charles McLean says your mate has exclusive rights to you sexually. Nobody else has any right. And you have exclusive responsibility to keep yourself sexually pure. So as we're talking about this, and this absolutely applies to those whether single or married, this absolutely applies, that there is no proper expression of sexuality outside of marriage. But we also, as we're talking with others, we talk to teenagers, young people of any sort, I say young people, anybody less than 100, they need to hear this. Our culture is completely missed the boat on this. I mean, if you watch TV shows and movies much at all, you probably have seen something where they're portraying some sort of romantic relationship. How often does Hollywood portray a desirable romance taking place between a husband and wife? I don't think it's often. I can't think of any instance myself, but it's certainly not often. What is portrayed as desirable, exciting, as what everybody's going is either an adulterous relationship or an immoral relationship before marriage, or just completely outside of marriage with no thought of marriage. And our culture needs to learn, needs to hear, and needs to be, and understanding the privacy aspect here, and also needs to know that within Christianity, that Christian couples are exclusive to one another. That they are committed to this purity in their relationship. That as Christians, part of the way that we confront our culture is by just simply being pure. And then again, teaching others as we have opportunity. And again, kids, grandkids, great opportunities there to teach them what the Scriptures says. And verse 18 tells us that the private expression of physical intimacy is a blessing from God and is blessed by God. So again, this is not a shameful thing. This is not something that we deny and just think, nope, doesn't happen. We don't, and it's not that idea at all. It is something to be enjoyed because it is a blessing from God. And you go back to Genesis chapter 1 in your minds. God created man and woman, created them in his own image. And we know Genesis chapter 2, God commanded Adam to not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But in Genesis chapter 1, God blessed them. His blessing of Adam and Eve was what? Does anybody know? Be fruitful and multiply. Part of his blessing was to have a lot of kids, which obviously necessitates sexual intimacy. This is a blessing given from the beginning, and it's something that Proverbs says that it is it is blessed by God. And as a result, it is truly a joy. You're rejoicing with the wife of your youth, so that it should be something that is delightful in its proper expression. And then, as I've already said, but Proverbs 19 says, points us to, is that his physical intimacy is to be found in a committed, covenantal relationship. He says, speaking of the wife of your youth, that you are going to her. That's it. Within that committed relationship, that's it. There's established relationship. If you remember Proverbs chapter 2, we're warned about the immoral woman, that she has forsaken the covenant. She entered into a covenant with her husband and she forsook it. That forsaken covenant, there is no, or there's not to be any relationship with one that you're not in a covenant with, but rather here it is found in. And the idea here is verse 19 again, let her breasts satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. It's erotic. I mean, I don't want to be, I'm not going to be salacious, but what he is saying here is absolutely intended. He's saying, go enjoy that relationship. And the emphasis here in this passage is enjoyment. It's not procreation. I know for a long time, I believe it was the Catholic Church, I don't know if other churches taught this, but there was a teaching that it was improper to have sex for any purpose except for having children. And the Bible doesn't teach that. It says enjoy yourself. Just that simple. Enjoy it. And it says as well, we go to still verse 19, that physical intimacy is appropriate. It is proper. And in fact, he says be enraptured with her. It literally is be drunk on her. It's a negative word. It's used most of the time in the Bible negatively. Here it is used very positively to the absolute abandonment to delight in the proper relationship. And again, I think there's real value in us understanding and communicating when it's appropriate to do so and communicating in an appropriate fashion, that God has given the sexual relationship for our pleasure, for our good and enjoyment. It's not just a utilitarian function, but it is a delightful one that has been given to us. And then we see that exclusive physical intimacy is a commitment. As part of what he's saying there is make sure this happens. It's a discipline. It's something that has to keep happening. It's something to be nourished. It's something to be cultivated. It's not just to be enjoyed, but to promote its flourishing. And with this as well is to make your spouse your object of desire. When we're learning, we're cultivating, and again, this our culture screams against this. Because it parades images all over the place, male and female. It says these are desirable people, and it seeks to get us to turn our eyes and to desire whatever the ideal is of today, which, as we know the ideal changes from generation to generation or from decade to decade, seemingly. And our culture is seeking to say, this is what you want. This is who you should desire. And Scripture said, no, the ideal is your spouse. The most desirable person on the planet is your spouse. For you. Nobody else. And if we're permitting the culture to say, desire this is what you should desire. This is what your spouse should look like. Or this is what the person you desire should look like. We are letting them give us a wrong view of what God has created. We're letting them misuse God's good gifts. Part of the way we nourish this is we keep that desire focused. And again, teaching others, don't scroll through the images. I don't know if anybody thumbs through magazines anymore, but don't thumb through the magazines. Don't surf the websites. Turn off the ads. I think ad blockers are the greatest thing in the world. I really do. We don't need whatever sidebar images that somebody is throwing up to try to distract us. Turn off the ads. Mute the ads on TV. Or just turn the TV off when the commercials come on. If you can do that. I know some systems, they stop whatever you're watching until you turn it back on and they play the commercial anyway. So don't let the world teach what is desirable. Desire the spouse that God has given you. And teach others to desire the spouse God has given them. And then we also read in verse 20 that this physical enjoyment is protective. When we practice this, it protects from the allure of others. And Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He's answering a question about marriage, and he goes into and begins to discuss sex within marriage. And he says, if there are times where it's permissible by agreement to abstain from sexual relationship, but it should be for a set period of time, and it's known, there's the purpose, here's the time limit. And part of the reason that he instructs marriages or married couples to have sex on a regular basis is to protect them. It's to protect them from the temptations of others. And that's what Proverbs is saying. It's the same principle. And then we go to verses 20 to 23. What he tells us is now the dangers of the extramarital relationship. He says, God knows the secret deeds of men. The ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. This is in the context of moral and immoral relationships. And what he is saying is that secret tryst is known. That app on the phone is known. That late night scrolling is known. All the secret ways, all that man does and seeks to hide, and maybe hides from others, God knows. He also says, verse 22, the sexual sin is subjugating. It brings us into bondage. Why? His own iniquities entrap the wicked man. He is caught in the cords of his sin. If I set a snare up, put a big rope there and put some bait in the middle of it. Put your favorite kind of chocolate right in the middle of it. You walk up to it and you see there's obviously a snare here. It's obviously designed to trap me. So if I stick my hand in there, my foot in to pick this up, it is going to trap me, fling me up in the air, or do whatever it's going to do to hold me. And most people are going to say, I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't know why this is here. I don't know what they're doing. I'm not sticking my hand in that trap. That's what sexual sin is. It is this enslaving trap. And enslaving is the right word for this. We have been hearing, or I've been hearing for years now, talking about addiction to pornography. And they talk about it in similar terminology as addiction to drugs. And it's a different, physical function, different brain function going on, different. It has some similarity in the effects on the brain as drugs do, but it also quite different in many respects. And so I don't necessarily like the language of addiction, but at the same time it's accurate. It absolutely is a bondage. An enslavement of bringing the person into the control of something else. And again, this is one of the things that people need to hear. Our culture desperately needs to hear. This is not just a lark. It's not just something you're experimenting with and playing with, and it's fine. It's not going to hurt. Not going to affect you later. It brings into bondage. And we are recognizing now, I actually just read an article this week about the effects of pornography on young people. So there's a lot of really disturbing facts in my head that I'm not going to share this morning, or this afternoon, but I tell you, it is known and proven to be destructive. So that when a teenager, now the average age for kids now first seeing pornographic images is less than 10 years old. It's appalling, but the effect it has lasts. We need to be communicating. This is not a game. This is not something to play around with. This is toying with a bear trap, and it will take your hand off at least if you don't stop playing around with this. It is destructive. And he says, just simply don't do it. Sexual sin is misleading. He shall die for lack of instruction. It's teaching something that's not truth. It's instructing, but it's not real instruction. It's instruction in falsehoods. It's instruction in vanities of emptiness. It's instructing in the way that things are not. And one of the things I have to say, and do say when marriage counseling, premarital counseling, when I'm talking to a young couple that's not yet married, one of the things I tell them, I have to tell them, is you have seen, and anymore it's just an assumption, you have seen pornographic images, you've seen pornographic representations, and your married relationship is not going to be like that. That's not the real world. That's make-believe. And you can't, and that's one of the problems that our kids are running into, is they're expecting life to be like what the screen portrays. And they're finding out it's not. And they don't know what to do. And this sexual sin says, this is what you'll have. It's wonderful. It's great. It's all of this. Whatever the fantasy may be, it's all of your fantasy. And it's all a lie. Again, we go back to the immoral woman. Back in verse 3, her mouth drips honey. Her lips are smoother than oil. But what is it? What is she really? She is poisonous, more bitter than wormwood. Her, at the end, it cuts, it destroys like a sword. It's not pleasant, it's not healing, it is poisonous and destructive. And this sexual sin is absolutely misleading. And I could keep going on this. I will mention one thing that's worth pointing out. Sexual sin is misleading about the nature of humanity. It lies about what we're here for. Because what it teaches, especially, I would say, particularly in the pornographic representations of our culture, it teaches that humans are objects of desire. That they're objects of fantastic fulfillments. They're not image bearers of God. They are objects in which lust can be satisfied. I can foist fantasies on them and make them do or say or be whatever I want them to be. They're not a person anymore. They're a figment. And sexual sin, again, the prolific sexual sin of our culture is teaching our culture to view people as just perpetual objects. They're not humans. Certainly not the image of God. They're just objects. And of course we know that is absolute lie. One of the ways I'm going to come back to this after this study in Proverbs is over. So you have to come back in about a year and a half and we'll come to continue this. But one of the ways that we combat the lies of sexual sin is we understand what it means that every human is created in the image of God. We as Christians, we must have a firm grasp that everyone we meet is the image bearer of God. They're not an object of desire. They're not something just to fill a fantasy. They're not something just to be there to do whatever I want them to do. And I'm going beyond just now the sexual realm, and because many people treat others simply as objects. And the Christian response to all of that is, no, we are created in the image of God. That's an image bearer. That's a reflection of God. And we cannot listen to the lies of our culture. We must listen to the truth of the Word. Sexual sin is destructive. We've already seen this. He dies. Does it get any worse than that? He dies in his folly. It is utterly and absolutely destructive. And then sexual sin has built-in God-designed punishment. We go back to verse 21. The ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord. He ponders all his path. His own iniquities entrap the wicked. He is caught in the cords of his sin. God is seeing. God knows human nature, obviously. And he has built in punishment, so that the enslavement itself is part of the punishment. Some of the consequences that we read last week, earlier in chapter 5, they're part of the punishment. The shame, the dishonor, the loss, the regret. It's the built-in punishment. And so as we're thinking about this and we're talking to others about this and we're recognizing this is not a game. This is not something to make jokes about. This is something that God has very definite and strong opinions about. And he has built the world so that when we misuse sex, we pay the cost. God is gracious. We don't mean in any way that there's no forgiveness. But God has designed things so that when we violate these principles, it's painful. Sometimes it's far more painful than we imagined it would be. The New English Bible, I think, writes verse 23 very vividly. He will perish for want of discipline, wrapped in the shroud of his boundless folly. You know what a shroud is? It's what they wrap around a dead body. He is going to perish. And his own folly will be his burial clothes, wrapping him up and hold him tight all the way to the grave. So let me contrast these things very briefly. So we talk about fidelity within the marriage relationship versus the philandering, the playing around of whatever way we may be. We are told first, immorality brings ruin. Fidelity brings rejoicing. Does our culture say that? You tell me, does our culture say that faithfulness in marriage is a source of great joy? But this is what Scripture teaches. Immorality is covenant destroying. Fidelity is covenant strengthening. I already alluded to chapter 2 and the one who forsakes the covenant. She abandons the husband of her youth. Immorality wreaks havoc on that covenant. That to have and to hold for better, for worse, till death do we part. That covenant that everyone that's married makes. That covenant which binds them two into one flesh. So that God has joined them two together. Immorality wreaks havoc on that. Fidelity, faithfulness strengthens that covenant. So that the proper enjoyment of the sexual relationship within marriage serves to strengthen the covenant between man and wife. The end of immorality is bitterness. The end of fidelity is blessing. So why would you go for that which is bitter? The pleasures of immorality devastate. The pleasures of fidelity satiate. They satisfy. The pleasures of immorality, there's no denying that there are pleasures present, but they are destructive, life-destroying pleasures. Fidelity, it satisfies. It brings a true rejoicing and joy in it. The pleasures of immorality corrupt. The pleasures of fidelity captivate. It's one of those things when you go for a faithful relationship, you practice and engage that faithful relationship, it becomes more and more delightful. And that of immorality does not. It becomes more and more like gravel in your teeth. It's not satisfying or happy at all. It is simply not worth it. There's everything to lose and nothing to gain. Again, the world does not tell us that, but our world needs to hear it. It needs to hear this over and over again. This immorality that is just plastered everywhere is not worth it. Ever. So what do we do with this? Very quickly, let me wrap up. And I've already said much of this. Let me restate it. Sexual intimacy is designed for marriage. That's it. That's the only place it's designed to be expressed. Only in marriage. Sexual intimacy finds its greatest expression in marriage. And I picked that word greatest for a reason. Because again, contrary to our culture, the greatest expression of sexual intimacy is in marriage. The fling, the one night tryst is not the greatest expression. But rather, the greatest expression of it comes in the midst of that covenant relationship, in which two people are deeply committed to one another, far beyond the bed, but in every aspect of their life. And then the bed becomes really the greatest expression of the sexual intimacy. That's why Hebrews says the marriage bed is honorable in all things. Sexual intimacy is a private matter, and we should accept no substitutes for marital intimacy. There is no substitute for it. We should not take anything else as acceptable or permissible. We need to maintain a biblical value of sexual intimacy in marriage. We need to remember God brings judgment on those who commit sexual sin. Even if you never get caught, God brings the consequences of immorality on to the immoral. God is active. That's one of the things we need to remember. God is active. Going into private browsing mode does not keep God from watching and seeing and knowing or being uninvolved. You can delete your cookies. You cannot delete the consequences. Because God is actively involved in the lives of every man. He builds judgment into sin. He brings judgment on sin. If you do not listen to biblical wisdom, you will suffer the consequences. Just that simple. Satan's substitutes are never better and are always worse than God's gifts. This is Satan's favorite lie. God's withholding something good from you. I have something better. And it's never true. In any way, it's never true. And then we also have to recognize, I don't mean to end on a down note, but this is a reality. The unsaved world does not and cannot understand human sexuality because it is not submitted to God and His wisdom. Dr. Ruth knows nothing about human sexuality. Well, she may understand, I don't even know if she's still alive. She may understand biology, but has no understanding of the way that God has designed men and women. I don't even know. She's the last expert on that matter that I even know anything about. So there's probably other experts out there that present themselves as knowing everything you need to know, writing books on everything you need to know. If they're not submitted to God's wisdom, if they do not fear God, they do not have godly wisdom. And we cannot take their word for it because they have a degree or they have studied or whatever they may have done that's made them an expert in this matter. If they're not submitted to God, they do not have wisdom. We must take God's word at face value. You must take what he says as truth. And I would say in this case, ignore whatever the world's saying, because it doesn't matter at all.